Hey, what's up YouTube? Today I'm going to be doing something a little different. I'm going to be doing a crash course on CSS animations. CSS animations are a fun way to spruce up an interface with some moving elements. You can draw attention to those elements, and honestly they just look super cool. Throughout the video we'll be going over some of the basics, which you don't need to be an animator to know, and going over some of the considerations that you need to keep in the back of your mind when you're animating elements for the web. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So what do I mean by CSS animations? Well, CSS animations simply allow us to add movement or animate elements on our web pages to draw attention to them. So you can see an example of this here on my website. I have this call to action button that asks visitors to join my Discord community for developers, and you can see it kind of wiggles and shakes and draws the eye. So that is an example of a CSS animation. So let's go ahead and jump into the code to see how I did this. But before we do that, I want to talk about today's sponsor. That's right, this video is sponsored by me. I'm sponsoring myself. I am coming out with a book here in the next couple weeks called Conquer CSS, and if you're here on this video, then it means that you have some interest in doing just that. You want to conquer CSS, you want to master CSS animations, but before you run, you need to walk. And if you're a new developer or a student or even an experienced developer, I have written this book that there is something in it for everyone. It's just like the subtitle says here, you can master the fundamentals of cascading style sheets and create a more beautiful web presence. So what can you do today? Like I said, this book isn't out yet, but what you can do is you can go to conquercss.com and hit notify me at launch, and you will see a space where you can put in your email. And what this does is it just signs you up to be notified when the book launches. I will not spam you. It will be a simple reminder, an announcement saying, hey, the book is out if you're interested in snagging a copy, and it's going to be deeply on sale for the first week. So I wanted to just take a moment to say this is coming up, and it would mean a lot to me if you at least considered getting notified at launch. You don't even have to buy it. There's no obligation. And like I said, this is going to a special email list. I will not email you about anything else. So without further ado, let's get back into the video. All right, so let's get into what we're looking at in our code here. This is the code from the button example that I showed previously. We're actually going to work down and work our way up. First things first, though, you don't need to worry about cursor pointer. That is not related to the animation. That is strictly a style that I wanted to apply to the button. I actually need to move that into my primary class for that button. So, note to self. But let's go ahead and start with our @keyframe selector. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to create animations, this @keyframe selector. So this right there, that's an arrow mostly pointing in the right direction, allows us to set up keyframes. Now, what are keyframes? Keyframes are simply each step of the animation that we're walking through. So if you're not aware, an animation is just a bunch of pictures laid on top of each other. So when you are watching your favorite cartoon and a character is moving across the screen, what's really happening in at least a 2D cartoon is many pictures are being played in specific frames over and over again, and those frames are called keyframes. So after our keyframe selector, we name our animation. So right here, this shake is the name of our animation. And then you can use percentages to set up each major frame of your animation. Now you may be saying, Ryan, why do you start at 45%? Well, that's because for the first 2.3 or 2 1/3 of a second of my animation, and we'll get into how I come up with that number, but for the first 2-ish seconds of my animation, I don't want the button to move. I want it to be a very quick jolt in the middle of the animation. And then every 1/4 of a second after that, I change the keyframe. So you'll see a 1/4 of a second later, or 50% of the way through the animation, we use transform rotate to tilt our button -3 degrees. And then we rapidly, a quarter of a second later again, tilt our button back the other direction 3 degrees. And then we reset it at the end to 0 degrees. And so these are the steps that our animation is going to take. It's going to tilt our button one way, then the other way, then it's going to reset. So working our way up, your animation timing function, here I use linear, and this essentially is a value that allows you to affect how you move through your keyframes. For the scope of this course, we'll always be using linear because we want to move through our keyframes in an even fashion. If you know a little bit about Bezier curves, this is where you can do some easing, if you will, to change your animations. And then here is the meat and potatoes. The animation property allows us to choose our animation. So we set up shake down here. So we just put shake. We put the duration of our animation. So this right here is duration, and that's going to be 5.25 seconds, which is how I came up with that 2.3 seconds. That's 45% of 5.25. And then our loop. So I want this animation to continue as long as the user is on the page. So we set this to infinite. Now we're going to do another example later in the video where we don't use infinite. We only want to animate the element in our future example one time. So I'll show you how to do that as well. So one more time, let's take a look at how this all looks. So yes, once again, you can see there's a pause, and then it goes -3 degrees to the left, and then the right, and then it pauses again. And those pauses in between are created by that gap with the 45%, and then it ends on 60%, so there's 40% on the back end. All right, so let's jump into the code and the code editor, and let's build an animation from scratch just to cement these concepts. All right, so let's go ahead and create a fresh animation of our own. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with a div here, and it's gonna have a class of orange square, and there doesn't have to be anything in it. And then in a style tag, you can do this in a style sheet, but I'm gonna there's not going to be a lot of CSS here, so I'm just gonna go ahead and do it in a style tag so we can see it all working together. We are gonna style our orange square a little bit. We're gonna make it an orange square. So we'll do a width of 300 pixels, a height of 300 pixels. We'll do a border radius of 15 pixels, excuse me. And then just for the purposes of this video, let's do a position absolute with a top of 25% and a left of 25%. This isn't really how you want to move elements around on a page. If you want more info on how to correctly move elements around on a page, check out my book, Conquer CSS. But for the purposes of this video, it works. So if we take a look, what did I do wrong here? Did I spell something wrong? Refresh? Where's my orange square? Oh, duh, gotta make it orange. There we go. Okay, so there's our orange square. Okay, so let's go ahead and animate this. So we want to animate it on hover. And so we're going to do animation name, flip, animation duration, 1 second, animation iteration count, 1, and animation timing function, linear. And I want to do this in the long form so you can kind of see each of the CSS properties, but I'll show you how to shorten it in a moment. And so now, with @keyframes in our identifier, we can create flip, and we'll do 25% transform rotate 90 degrees. And then if we copy this down 3 times. I'm going to change this to 50% and make this 180 degrees, and then 75%, 270 degrees, and then 100%. It's going to be 360 degrees. So let's take a look at that. So on hover, we get our square, our orange square, to fully spin. And animation is as simple as that. Now, in both our examples, we use transform, rotate. These can be any CSS properties. So if I do a background color of red, and then a background color of green, and then a background color of, I don't know, blue, RGB, and then we'll reset it back to orange and save it. You can see it goes through our colors in an animated fashion. Now, you don't always have to do 4 keyframes. You can do as many keyframes as you want. You can do 100 keyframes, 1 for each percentage. And there's other methods of adding keyframes that you don't have to use percentages. I just find that percentages are the easiest. And so if I delete 2 of these, or if I delete 1 of these, for example, and save it and go back, you can see it still works. It just removes one of those keyframes. But I'm going to set it back to our rotations and show you how to shorten these properties. So the shorthand is animation, flip, so the animation name, the animation duration, and then the animation iteration count will be 1 because we only want it to happen 1 time, and then the animation timing function will be linear. So if we save that and go back, we can see it works this same exact way. And that is your crash course on CSS animation. Go ahead and try and put together some really cool animations of your own, but I want to have one final note. There are accessibility reasons that you don't want to over animate a web page. Things like vestibular disorders, which make a person extremely dizzy if there are too many animations on a page. For example, it's becoming more common practice to animate a page on scroll, do a little bit of scroll jacking and animate some elements. If you're going to do something like that, try and use some JavaScript to add a way to turn that off for people who may not be able to view web pages with that many animations. Even this is a lot. I mean, I'm spinning a square all the way around, and I'm doing it on hover. Like if someone hovers over this over and 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 over again, it can hurt the eyes. So use animations sparingly, but have fun with it. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this quick crash course on CSS animations.